This ain't a place for tourists, baby." The words cut through the Friday evening noise at the Ironclad like a blade through silk. Jackson's voice carried that particular brand of arrogance reserved for men who'd never been truly humbled. The kind of confidence that came from biceps the size of most people's thighs and a seal trident tattooed across his chest. He stood 6'2" in his civilian clothes, a navy blue t-shirt stretched tight across muscles earned through years of brutal training, his shaved head gleaming under the bar's amber lighting. At the corner of the polished oak bar, Kate Rivers sat perfectly still. 32 years old, honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail with loose strands framing a face that spoke of long shifts and longer nights. Her gray shirt, simple and unremarkable, bore the logo of Coronado Medical Center across the left breast. Green eyes, the color of deep water under storm clouds, tracked Jackson's approach with the kind of awareness most people reserved for crossing busy streets. The beer came without warning. One moment Jackson was celebrating some meaningless victory at the dartboard, the next his elbow swung wide in a motion that looked accidental but carried the precision of someone who'd done this before. Golden liquid arced through the air in slow motion, catching the light before splashing across Kate's shoulder and chest, soaking through gray fabric and dripping onto the worn bar stool below. 43 people turned their heads. The Ironclad wasn't large by military bar standards, just a single room with dark wood paneling, a handful of tables, and a reputation for being where operators drank when they wanted to avoid the tourist crowds. Every patron knew the dance about to unfold. They'd seen it before. The ritual humiliation of someone who didn't belong. The pack mentality that defined military culture in its ugliest form. Kate reached for the napkin dispenser with movements so economical they bordered on mechanical. Her right hand pulled 3 napkins. Her left set down the phone she'd been studying, screen dark before anyone could glimpse its contents. The way her fingers moved, folding the thin paper into precise triangles, should have been meaningless. Instead, it created a pattern anyone with combat medical training would recognize instantly, the field dressing technique taught to special operations corpsmen for stopping arterial bleeds. But she buried the tell quickly, using the folded napkins to blot beer from her shirt with the weary patience of someone accustomed to cleaning up other people's messes. Jackson leaned against the bar, his massive frame blocking her from the room. 3 of his teammates materialized behind him like wolves drawn to the scent of prey. The closest was Kyle, a weapons tech with the lean build of a distance runner and eyes that never stopped calculating. Next to him stood Webb, a private military contractor with a dark beard going gray at the edges and the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years in desert sun. The 4th man, Lieutenant Miller, hung back slightly, his officer's bearing evident even in jeans and a polo shirt that did nothing to soften his razor-sharp features. "Sorry about that," Jackson said, his tone making clear he wasn't sorry at all. "Accidents happen when civilians wander into the wrong establishment. Maybe stick to Starbucks next time, yeah? Leave the warrior bars to actual warriors." Kate's response was silence. Not the shocked silence of someone caught off guard, but the deliberate quiet of a person choosing not to engage. She continued blotting beer, her breathing falling into a pattern that anyone trained to recognize stress management techniques would find remarkable. 4-count inhale through the nose, 4-count hold, 4-count exhale through the mouth, 4-count hold. Combat breathing, the kind taught to operators before high-stakes missions when keeping your heart rate controlled meant the difference between successful shots and catastrophic failures. Her left hand moved to the water glass the bartender had brought earlier, fingers wrapping around the condensation-slick surface with what appeared to be a casual grip. Except the placement was wrong for casual, thumb locked over the top rim, 3 fingers providing structural support from below, pinky extended for balance. It was the tactical carry position for moving while maintaining weapon readiness, adapted unconsciously to a drinking glass. In the back corner booth, mostly hidden in shadows cast by the Ironclad's deliberately dim lighting, Master Chief Daniels set down his whiskey with careful precision. 60 years old, built like an old growth tree that refused to fall despite decades of storms, his weathered face carried the map of a life spent in places the news never reported on. 28 years of service, most of it in naval special warfare, had taught him to recognize things others missed, the micro details that separated professionals from pretenders. His gray eyes, still sharp despite the years, tracked the slight adjustment in Kate's posture. The way her feet repositioned beneath the bar stool, weight shifting forward onto the balls, heels barely touching the footrest. It was the stance of someone preparing to move, to react, to explode into action if circumstances demanded. But her face showed nothing, just tired acceptance as she dealt with the beer soaking through her clothes. Jackson wasn't finished. He never was. Men like him needed audiences for their performances, needed witnesses to validate their dominance. He reached out and tapped the small black bag resting beside Kate's phone, the kind of compact medical kit emergency room nurses carried for shifts that might require anything from basic first aid to improvised trauma care. "What's this?" He pulled the bag toward him before Kate could respond, unzipping it with the casual violation of someone who'd never considered consent a meaningful concept. "Let me guess. Hello Kitty Band-Aids, maybe some hand sanitizer, nurse stuff." His teammates laughed on cue, the kind of rehearsed amusement that came from too many similar scenes played out in too many bars. Kyle pulled out his phone, already framing the shot, while Webb leaned in closer for a better view of whatever embarrassment Jackson was about to uncover. The bag's contents spilled across the bar surface under Jackson's rough handling. Medical supplies, standard issue for emergency personnel. Gauze packets, medical tape, a stethoscope, nitrile gloves. But mixed among them were items that didn't quite fit the civilian narrative. An Israeli bandage, the kind used for massive hemorrhage control in combat zones. A chest seal designed for sucking chest wounds. And something that clinked against the wood as it tumbled free, drawing every eye in the immediate vicinity. A challenge coin, not the polished brass variety handed out at military ceremonies, but something older, worn silver that had been handled so many times the edges were smooth. It rolled across the bar's surface before settling near Jackson's elbow, face up, revealing details that should have stopped the mockery cold. Instead, Jackson picked it up, holding it to the light with theatrical examination. Well, playing dress-up, are we? Let me guess. Bought this at the surplus store? Maybe eBay? He turned it over, studying both sides with exaggerated skepticism. Looks pretty worn for something fake. Nice touch, though. Almost had me convinced for a second. Kate's hand moved, reaching for the coin with the same unhurried efficiency she'd shown throughout the encounter. But Jackson jerked it away, holding it above his head like a schoolyard bully with a stolen toy. "Nah, I think we'll hang on to this for a bit. Evidence, for when we report you for stolen valor." The charge hung in the air, heavy and serious. Stolen valor wasn't just an insult in military communities, it was a prosecutable offense, a violation that struck at the heart of everything service members held sacred. Around the bar, conversations quieted, phones came out. In the age of viral content, public confrontations were entertainment, and this one was shaping up to be a good show. Lieutenant Miller stepped forward, his officer's instincts taking over. Where Jackson was blunt force, Miller was surgical precision, the kind of man who'd learned to weaponize regulations and procedures. "Ma'am," he said, his tone carrying just enough false courtesy to make it insulting, "I'm going to need to see some identification, military identification specifically. Possessing military challenge coins without proper authorization is a serious matter." Kate looked up at him, meeting his gaze with those storm water eyes. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, an expression that came and went so fast, most observers would miss it entirely. But Daniel saw it from his corner booth, recognized it with the certainty of someone who'd worn the same look himself. It was the expression of a person doing math, calculating odds, weighing outcomes, deciding whether the situation required intervention or could be allowed to play out further. She reached into her back pocket with deliberate slowness, movements designed to broadcast no threat, pulling out a standard leather wallet. From it, she produced a California driver's license, sliding it across the bar toward Miller with 2 fingers. The photo showed the same woman, same honey blonde hair, same green eyes. Kate Elizabeth Rivers, address in San Diego. Organ donor. No special designations, no military markers, nothing that suggested she was anything more than what Jackson had labeled her from the start. A civilian nurse who'd wandered into the wrong bar. Miller studied the license with the intensity of someone searching for hidden messages in ordinary text. He took a photo of it with his phone, the flash making Kate blink. "This doesn't prove anything," he said finally, handing it back. "Anyone can have a civilian ID. The question is whether you have the other kind." "I don't," Kate said. Her voice, heard clearly for the first time, carried a slight Midwest accent that softened consonants and extended vowels. It was the voice of someone from Nebraska or Iowa, places far from oceans and the culture that grew up around them. 2 words, simple and direct, neither defensive nor aggressive, just statement of fact. Webb had his phone out now. The the camera trained on the challenge coin still in Jackson's possession. He was live streaming, Daniels realized, broadcasting this encounter to whatever audience followed his social media presence. "Check this out, guys," Webb narrated for his viewers, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd found a content goldmine. "Got what looks like a stolen valor situation developing here at the Ironclad. Civilian nurse with military gear, can't produce proper ID. This is exactly the kind of nonsense that disrespects real operators. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, hit that like button right now, because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone assumes is weak. Subscribe to see how she responds to this disrespect, and hit that thanks button to support this story, because what happens next will leave you speechless." Kate's phone buzzed against the bar surface, the vibration barely audible under the growing noise of the crowd. She glanced at the screen, and for the briefest moment her jaw tightened. Whatever message had arrived wasn't good news. But she pocketed the device without responding, returning her attention to the situation developing around her. "You know what I think?" Jackson leaned closer, his beer breath washing over her in waves that made several nearby patrons wrinkle their noses. "I think you're one of those groupies. The kind who hangs around military bars trying to pick up operators, pretending to be something you're not to seem interesting. I've seen a dozen just like you, all fake, all desperate for attention." Kyle moved to Jackson's left, his phone still recording, capturing multiple angles of the confrontation. "Maybe we should check her bag more thoroughly, see what other military gear she's stolen. Could be looking at a serious case here." The suggestion sparked something in the watching crowd. What had started as casual entertainment was taking on the flavor of citizens' justice, the kind of mob mentality that turned ordinary people into participants in something uglier. Several patrons moved closer, forming a loose semicircle that effectively trapped Kate between the bar and the wall of bodies. Through it all, she remained seated, her posture unchanged, her breathing maintaining that precise 4-count rhythm. The only sign of response was a slight adjustment in how her weight distributed across the bar stool, a micro shift that put her center of gravity over her feet in a way that would allow instant movement in any direction. It was the kind of automatic repositioning that came from thousands of hours of training, so deeply ingrained it happened below conscious thought. But most people weren't looking for such details. They saw what Jackson wanted them to see: a woman caught in a lie, cornered by her own deception, about to be exposed in front of dozens of witnesses, and however many more were watching Webb's live stream. The bartender, a man called Leo with forearms like bridge cables and a faded Ranger tab tattoo barely visible beneath rolled sleeves, moved closer to Kate's position. He'd been tending bar at the Ironclad for 3 years, had seen every variation of military posturing and civilian confrontation the place could produce. But something about this situation felt different, carried a tension he couldn't quite identify. "Maybe we should all take a step back," Leo suggested, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying to de-escalate without taking sides. "Give the lady some space." "The lady," Miller emphasized the word with surgical precision, "is potentially committing a federal offense. Until we establish her actual credentials, she stays right where she is." Kate finally spoke again, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by the immediate group. "I'm an emergency room nurse at Coronado Medical. I stopped here after my shift for one drink before going home. That's all. The coin is personal property. I'm not claiming to be anything I'm not." "Then explain the coin," Jackson demanded. He held it up again, this time making sure Webb's camera got a clear shot. "Explain why you have something that looks military issue if you're just a civilian nurse. It was a gift." "From who?" "Someone who served." "Convenient." Jackson's grin widened, the expression of a predator who'd cornered prey. "Real convenient how you can't provide details. You know what I think? I think you found this in a pawn shop, thought it would make you look cool. Never considered that real warriors might actually call you out on it." Kyle stepped forward, inserting himself into Kate's personal space with the casual aggression of someone who'd never been taught about boundaries. "You know what we do to stolen valor cases? We make sure everyone knows. Your face is already on Webb's stream, probably got a few thousand viewers by now. By tomorrow, you'll be internet famous for all the wrong reasons." The threat was clear. In the age of social media justice, being labeled a stolen valor case meant permanent reputation damage. It meant harassment, doxing, employment consequences. It meant becoming a cautionary tale shared in military circles for years to come. Kate's response was to reach for her water glass, taking a slow sip that seemed to frustrate her antagonists through its complete lack of reaction. The way her fingers wrapped around the glass, that same tactical grip, drew Daniel's attention again. He pulled out his own phone, not to record like the others, but to make a quiet call, his voice too low to be overheard as he spoke rapidly into the device. "All right, enough talk." Kyle's impatience had reached its limit. "You want to prove you're not full of nonsense? Let's do this properly. Backroom's got a range set up. You claim that coin came from someone who served. That means you've been around military people, maybe picked up some skills. So prove it." He gestured toward a door at the back of the bar that led to what had once been a storage room before Leo converted it into a small shooting range for locals who wanted to practice without driving to the base. 25 meters, climate-controlled, with proper backstops and safety equipment. It wasn't regulation, but it was enough for basic drills and friendly competitions. "Field strip and M4, Kyle continued, warming to his challenge. "Standard disassembly and reassembly. The record here is 40 seconds, set by a SEAL Team 6 operator. You even get close to that, maybe we'll consider you might not be completely lying." The crowd murmured approval. This was better than simple confrontation. This was a test, measurable and definitive. Either Kate could perform or she couldn't, and her failure would be captured on multiple cameras for posterity. Miller nodded, his officer's mind appreciating the approach. "Fair test. Any civilian who's been around firearms could theoretically do it, but the speed would be telling. 40 seconds is professional level. If she's really just a nurse, she'll take 2 minutes or fail entirely." Kate set down her water glass with the same careful precision she'd shown throughout, the kind of control that suggested someone used to working in environments where shaking hands could mean the difference between successful procedures and catastrophic outcomes. She looked at Kyle, then at the M4 rifle he was already retrieving from a locked cabinet behind the bar, her expression unreadable. "One attempt," Miller said, establishing the rules. "No practice runs. Kyle will disassemble it, you reassemble. Standard field strip, nothing fancy. Timer starts when you touch the first component." Leo had moved to the end of the bar, his phone now also out, but instead of filming, he was typing rapid messages to someone. His weathered face creased with concern. Whatever response he received made him look up sharply at Kate, then over to where Daniel sat in the shadows, some silent communication passing between the two veterans that excluded everyone else in the room. Kyle worked quickly, breaking down the M4 with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd performed the task thousands of times. Upper receiver separated from lower, bolt carrier group removed, charging handle pulled free. Each component was placed on a clean white towel spread across the bar surface, arranged in no particular order, parts scattered like puzzle pieces. "Whenever you're ready," Kyle said, stepping back with a theatrical flourish. Jackson held up his phone, timer app visible on the screen, finger hovering over the start button. Webb adjusted his camera angle to capture both Kate's hands and her face, wanting viewers to see the moment of failure written across her features. Kate stood up from the bar stool for the first time since the encounter began, and several people unconsciously took a half step back. It wasn't that she was large or physically imposing. At 5'6" and 130 pounds, she should have been dwarfed by the operators surrounding her. But something in the way she moved, the economy of motion and absolute certainty of placement, created a presence that belied her size. She stepped to the towel, her green eyes scanning the scattered components with the quick assessment of someone cataloging inventory. Her lips moved slightly, counting or calculating, the movement so subtle most viewers would miss it entirely. Then her right hand reached out, fingers closing on the upper receiver, and Jackson hit the timer. What followed would be analyzed frame by thousands of viewers over the coming days, dissected and debated by military enthusiasts and firearms experts. Kate's hands moved with mechanical precision, each motion flowing into the next without pause or hesitation. Upper and lower receivers aligned and pinned. Bolt carrier group inserted, cam pin rotated and locked. Charging handle slid home with a metallic click that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent bar. Her fingers found components without searching. The kind of automatic recognition that came from assembling the same weapon in pitch darkness, in freezing water, while under fire or otherwise compromised. There was no showmanship, no wasted motion, just systematic reconstruction that built toward completion with the inevitability of sunrise. The final component, the rear takedown pin, clicked into place and Kate stepped back, her hands falling to her sides. Jackson's timer showed 32 seconds. The bar erupted in shocked exclamations, but Kate's expression remained unchanged, as if performing at a level that exceeded SEAL Team 6 standards was unremarkable, barely worth noticing. That's impossible, Kyle breathed, reaching for the reassembled weapon. He checked it over with expert hands, finding every component properly seated, every pin correctly oriented. The assembly was textbook perfect, the kind of work that would pass armorer inspection without comment. Nobody assembles that fast with one hand. She used both hands, Webb protested, already knowing how weak the argument sounded. Dominant hand only, Daniels called from his corner, speaking up for the first time. His gravelly voice cut through the confusion like a blade. Right hand did all the primary work. Left was just stabilizing. That's how you're trained when you might need to keep a weapon ready in your other hand. That's not civilian training. That's not even standard infantry. The implication hung heavy. Jackson lowered his phone slowly, the triumphant expression draining from his face as he tried to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with his assumptions about the woman in front of him. Miller's eyes had narrowed, his officer's mind racing through possibilities, none of them fitting the narrative he'd constructed. Kate returned to her bar stool, picking up her water glass as if the last 32 seconds hadn't just undermined everything her antagonists believed about her. As she lifted the glass, her sleeve rode up slightly, exposing her forearm. In the bar's amber light, a pattern of scars became visible, the distinctive fragmentation marks that came from being too close to an IED when it detonated. The scars formed a constellation across her skin, old and well-healed but unmistakable to anyone who'd seen similar wounds. Webb's livestream chat was exploding, viewers demanding answers, throwing out theories. Some claimed the video was staged, others insisted they recognized Kate from somewhere. A few were already searching military databases and classified forums for any mention of female operators with her description. Lucky practice, Jackson said finally, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Probably spent weeks getting ready for this exact scenario, hoping to impress some operators. It's still fake. You're still fake. Miller held up a hand, silencing Jackson with the gesture. The shooting range, now. 5 rounds, 25 meters, standard target. That assembly could have been memorized, rehearsed, but marksmanship doesn't lie. His eyes locked onto Kate's face, searching for any flicker of fear or hesitation. Unless you'd rather admit the truth right now and save us all the time. Kate's response was to stand again, this time moving toward the back room without waiting for further prompting. The crowd parted for her, dozens of eyes tracking her movement, phones raised to capture whatever happened next. Leo moved to unlock the range door, his hand lingering on her shoulder for just a moment, a brief contact that could have been accidental or might have been a wordless warning. The range room was exactly as utilitarian as its purpose demanded. Concrete walls painted institutional gray, fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh clarity, a single shooting lane with a mechanical target system capable of moving paper silhouettes to various distances. The air smelled of gun oil and spent brass, underlaid with the chemical tang of cleaning solvents. Kyle pulled a Sig Sauer M17 from the range's weapon rack, the military's standard-issue sidearm, checking the chamber before loading a magazine with 5 rounds. 25 meters, standard paper target, center mass grouping. Anything outside a 6-inch circle is considered a miss for this test. He set the weapon on the bench, safety engaged, barrel pointed downrange. You'll have 60 seconds to take all 5 shots. Timer starts when you touch the weapon. What Kyle didn't mention, what he'd done while Kate's attention was elsewhere, was adjust the rear sight. A 15-minute of angle shift to the left, just enough to throw off point of aim for anyone relying on the sights alone. It was sabotage, pure and simple. But Jackson had signaled the approval with a subtle nod while Webb made sure his camera was angled away from the weapon during the adjustment. To them, it was justified. If Kate was faking, this would expose her. If she was real, she'd notice the sight misalignment and could call them out on it, proving she knew weapons well enough to recognize tampering. Either way, they'd have their answer. That their test had become deliberately rigged didn't trouble their conscience. Kate approached the bench, her movements unhurried despite the crowd pressing into the small room behind her. She picked up the M17, her left hand wrapping around the grip with that same tactical placement observers had noted on her water glass. But instead of immediately aiming downrange, she did something that made Daniels, now standing in the doorway, close his eyes briefly in recognition. She performed a press check, slightly retracting the slide to visually confirm a round was chambered, then let it return forward under its own spring pressure without manually releasing it. The technique was silent, smooth, and absolutely unnecessary for a weapon that had just been loaded in front of her. It was also exactly what operators were trained to do every single time they picked up a weapon, even if they'd watched it being loaded 10 seconds earlier. the kind of ingrained habit that became automatic through endless repetition. Then she raised the weapon, her stance shifting into a modified weaver that distributed recoil management through her skeletal structure rather than relying purely on muscle strength. Her breathing fell into that same four-count pattern, and on the exhale following the fourth beat, she pressed the trigger. The first round went downrange with a sharp crack that echoed off concrete walls. Before the sound fully faded, she'd fired again. 5 shots in rapid succession, each one following the same breathing pattern, the same muscle memory. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. Kyle moved to the target control, bringing the paper silhouette forward with mechanical whirring. As it emerged from the shadows at the far end of the range, his confident expression slowly crumbled. All 5 rounds had impacted within a 3-inch group, center mass, exactly where they should, despite the sight misalignment Kate should have been unable to compensate for. The watching crowd pressed closer, staring at the tight grouping that spoke of skills far beyond civilian training. Miller grabbed the target as soon as it reached the end of its track, studying it with the intensity of someone searching for evidence of tampering or trickery. But there was nothing to find. 5 holes, 5 perfect shots, undeniable evidence that Kate Rivers was significantly more than she appeared. "The sights," Kyle started to say, then stopped, realizing any explanation would require admitting to sabotage. "We're 15 minutes left," Kate finished for him, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the shocked silence. "I felt it when I picked up the weapon. Weight distribution was wrong, so I adjusted point of aim to compensate. Basic marksmanship correction for compromised equipment." She set the M17 down on the bench, safety engaged, barrel pointed downrange, exactly as she'd found it. Then she turned and walked back toward the main bar without waiting for response or reaction, leaving behind a room full of people whose entire understanding of the situation had just been demolished. Miller stood holding the target, his mind racing through implications. The rifle assembly could have been luck or memorization. The shooting, especially shooting that accounted for deliberate sight misalignment, was something else entirely. That required not just skill, but operational experience. The kind of muscle memory built through scenarios where failure meant consequences more severe than embarrassment. As Kate emerged back into the main bar area, Jackson moved to block her path one more time. But this time his posture was different, less aggressive, more uncertain. He still held the challenge coin, but now he looked at it with new eyes, seeing details he'd missed in his initial dismissal. "The equipment sabotage," Miller said, emerging from the range behind Kate. "You need to leave, right now, before this situation escalates further." Kate had returned to her bar stool, reaching for her medical bag to repack the contents Jackson had spilled. As she bent to retrieve a scattered packet of gauze, the challenge coin slipped from Jackson's fingers where he'd been turning it over and over, his grip made clumsy by conflicting thoughts. The worn silver disc hit the wooden floor with a ringing impact that somehow carried over every other sound in the bar, rolling in a wide arc before coming to rest at the scuffed boots of Master Chief Daniels. The older man bent slowly, his joints protesting the movement, and picked up the coin with the reverence some people reserved for holy relics. He held it to the light, his weathered face going absolutely pale beneath its permanent tan as he read the serial number stamped into the worn metal. SX0604. His lips moved silently, and every person close enough to see his expression felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bar's air conditioning. When Daniels looked up at Kate, his gray eyes held something between shock and what might have been fear. "Shadow 6, he whispered, the words barely audible, then louder, with the command voice of someone who'd spent decades being obeyed without question. "Everyone stand down, right now." The silence that followed Daniels's command was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of a room at rest, but the suffocating stillness that came when oxygen itself seemed to evacuate the space. 43 people stood frozen, their phones still raised, their eyes locked on the old Master Chief holding a worn silver coin like it might detonate in his hand. Jackson's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. His massive frame, which had dominated the bar all evening, seemed to shrink inward as he processed the 2 words Daniels had spoken. Shadow 6. The designation carried weight in special operations circles, the kind of dark legend whispered about in team rooms when the brass wasn't listening. Miller was the first to recover, his officer's training kicking in even as his face betrayed confusion. Master Chief, with all due respect, shadow units were disbanded after Operation Phantom Gate. That was 8 years ago. Whatever coin she has, it's either surplus or authentic. Leo's voice cut through Miller's rationalization. The bartender had moved from behind the bar, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid bursts of military shorthand that suggested the person on the other end understood exactly what he wasn't saying aloud. He ended the call and looked at Daniels, something unspoken passing between the two veterans. Confirm inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Kate remained on her bar stool, her posture unchanged despite every eye in the establishment boring into her. She'd stopped repacking her medical bag, her hands resting flat on the bar surface in a position that could have been surrender or might have been the stillness of a coiled spring. The water glass sat untouched, ice melting into dilution, condensation rings spreading across polished wood. Daniels moved closer, his boots heavy on the floor, each step deliberate. He held the coin between thumb and forefinger, angling it so the overhead lights caught the serial number etched into tarnished silver. SX0604. Shadow Experimental. 6th operator, 4th iteration. His voice carried the weight of someone reciting scripture. There were only 12 of these ever minted. I know because I watched them being made at the foundry in Virginia 18 years ago. He looked directly at Kate, and his expression held something that transcended respect. It was closer to the careful regard someone might show a loaded weapon discovered in an unexpected place. Shadow 6 hunted the hunters. That was the unit designation. Not the people smuggling weapons or planning attacks. The ones inside our own system selling them information, providing them cover, making sure operations failed at critical moments. Webb's livestream chat was erupting with questions, theories, accusations of elaborate hoax, but his camera hand had started to shake, the frame going unsteady as implications began filtering through his content creator mindset into something approaching comprehension. Kyle had backed up 3 steps, putting distance between himself and Kate without conscious decision, his body reacting to information his mind was still processing. Internal affairs, Miller said slowly, the words coming out like he was testing their weight. You're saying shadow units were internal investigations? That's not possible. Those operations would have required clearance levels that don't exist outside Pentagon inner circles. They existed. Daniels never took his eyes off Kate. 6 operators, cross-trained from Delta, DevGru, and Air Force Special Tactics, given carte blanche to find and eliminate threats from within the Special Operations community. No oversight, no official chain of command, completely deniable if exposed. He paused, his weathered face creasing with old pain. They were disbanded after Phantom Gate because the political cost of admitting we had internal corruption got too high. Easier to shut down the hunters than acknowledge what they'd found. Jackson had finally found his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. That's insane. You're saying she was some kind of secret police, spying on her own people? Protecting her own people, Daniels corrected, an edge entering his tone. From the ones who'd sell them out for money, ideology, or simple ego. The kind of people who'd adjust weapon sights before a test because their pride couldn't handle being wrong. Kyle's face went sheet white. His eyes darted to the range room door, then back to Kate, connecting dots with the awful clarity of someone realizing they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. That was just, we were testing if she'd noticed tampering. Kate spoke for the first time since the reveal began, her Midwest accent somehow sharper now, each word precisely placed. If she had the training to recognize sabotage and compensate without making it obvious, congratulations, you just demonstrated exactly the kind of operational awareness I was looking for. She stood up from the bar stool in one fluid motion, and this time, when people stepped back, it wasn't unconscious. It was self-preservation, the instinctive retreat from something they'd fundamentally misjudged. Kate wasn't tall, wasn't physically imposing, but the way she occupied space had changed. The tired nurse who'd accepted beer spilled on her clothes was gone, replaced by something that moved with the casual precision of a surgeon or a sniper, professions that shared more similarities than most people realized. Master Chief, she nodded to Daniels, a gesture of acknowledgement between peers. Then her green eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, positions, the subtle tells that separated the genuinely shocked from those whose surprise felt performative. I need everyone to stay exactly where they are for the next 10 minutes. No one leaves. No one makes calls. No one posts anything else to social media. You can't order us around, Miller objected, but his protest lacked conviction. You have no authority here. Even if that coin is legitimate, shadow units are disbanded. You're a civilian now, same as the rest of us. Kate pulled her phone from her pocket, the device's screen lighting up with a notification that made her jaw tighten fractionally. She read whatever message had arrived, her lips compressing into a thin line. When she looked up, something had shifted in her expression. Not anger exactly, but a cold calculation that made the temperature in the bar seem to drop. 72 hours ago, classified intelligence was leaked from Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Operational details about an upcoming mission in the Horn of Africa. Timing, personnel, logistics. Everything an enemy would need to set up an ambush that would cost American lives. Her voice remained level, conversational, which somehow made the words more chilling. The leak was traced to 3 potential sources, all with access to the relevant servers. All 3 were supposed to be at this bar tonight. The implication detonated like a grenade. Webb's phone clattered to the floor, his live stream still running, now capturing his slack-jawed expression. Miller took an involuntary step backward, his hand moving toward his pocket where his own phone rested. Jackson just stared, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Think you can guess who the traitor is? Drop your theory in the comments right now, and share this video. Your friends won't believe the twist coming next. Hit like if you're on the edge of your seat because the next 60 seconds will blow your mind. Kate's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and this time her reaction was visible, a sharp intake of breath that suggested whatever she'd just read was worse than bad. The leak just activated. 18 minutes ago from this location, someone transmitted encrypted data to an external server. The backup copy will auto-delete in 29 minutes unless we stop the protocol. That's impossible, Kyle protested. We've all been here the whole time. No one's been on laptops or phones. Kate's gaze locked onto Webb, who had bent to retrieve his dropped device. Advanced encryption apps disguised as social media. Upload capacity hidden in live stream data packets. You transmit intelligence hidden in innocent-looking content, and your handlers extract it on the other end. The NSA's been tracking this method for months. Webb straightened slowly, his phone clutched in both hands like a lifeline. You're crazy. I'm streaming, yeah, but it's just bar content. Entertainment. I'm not transmitting anything except what everyone can see. Then you won't mind unlocking your device and letting me verify that. Kate extended her hand, palm up, waiting. Her other hand had moved to rest on the bar near her medical bag, casual placement that put her fingers inches from whatever else she kept in that kit besides gauze and bandages. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Webb's eyes darted around the room, looking for support, escape, something to change the equation. He found only faces watching him with new suspicion, the crowd that had been on his side minutes ago now reassessing everything about the evening's events. I have rights, Webb said finally. You can't just confiscate private property without a warrant. I don't care what unit you used to be with, you're not law enforcement. No, agreed a new voice from the doorway, but I am. 2 men entered the ironclad, both wearing civilian clothes that did nothing to disguise their federal agent bearing. The first was tall and angular, with wire-rimmed glasses and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of their time in windowless offices. His partner was shorter, built like a fire hydrant, with the kind of watchful eyes that never stopped cataloging threats. Both had credentials already out, FBI shield and identification clearly visible. Special Agent Morrison, FBI Counterintelligence. The tall one spoke with the flat effect of someone who'd delivered this introduction 1,000 times. We're going to need everyone to remain calm and cooperate fully. This establishment is now part of an active investigation into the unauthorized disclosure of classified national defense information. Leo had moved to lock the front door, flipping the sign to closed, pulling down shades over windows that looked out onto the parking lot. The click of the deadbolt engaging seemed unnaturally loud. What had been a public bar was now effectively a sealed room, everyone inside trapped until the federal agents decided otherwise. Webb's face had gone from pale to gray, the color of old concrete. This is harassment. You can't just lock us in here. I want a lawyer. You'll get one, Morrison replied mildly, right after we secure the evidence. Now, you can hand over your phone voluntarily, or my partner can obtain a warrant which will be approved in approximately 6 minutes given the national security implications. Your choice, but choose quickly because every second you delay is another second that data gets closer to permanent deletion. The shorter agent, who hadn't introduced himself, moved to stand between Webb and the door. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present in a way that made it clear any attempt to leave would be physically prevented. Webb looked at Kate, and in his eyes she could see the moment calculation shifted from resistance to self-preservation. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him like water from a breached hull. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They had pictures. From Kandahar, things I did that weren't. The rules of engagement were complicated, and I made calls that looked bad out of context. So you sold out your country because you were afraid of being embarrassed? Miller's voice cracked like a whip, officer's authority reasserting itself now that the target was clear. You compromised operations, put lives at risk, became exactly the kind of traitor you pretended to despise? It wasn't supposed to be real intelligence. Webb's composure shattered completely, words tumbling out in desperate justification. They said they just wanted general information, nothing that could actually hurt anyone. Background stuff, publicly available data that I'd packaged to look classified. I didn't know they were using it to plan actual operations. They always say that, Morrison observed, pulling latex gloves from his pocket with practiced efficiency. They always claim they didn't know, didn't understand, didn't mean for it to go so far, and you always believe them because the alternative is accepting what you've really become. He held out his gloved hand. The phone, now. Webb handed it over with trembling fingers. Morrison passed it immediately to his partner, who produced a specialized device from his jacket, connecting it to the phone with a cable that looked decidedly non-standard. Whatever software he ran, it worked fast, screens of data scrolling past too quickly for civilian eyes to follow. Got it, the shorter agent announced after 90 seconds of tense silence. Encryption app hidden in the photo filter program, active transmission protocol still sending, data packets embedded in video stream compression artifacts. He looked up at Morrison with grim satisfaction. This is enough for a warrant on the receiving servers. We can trace the whole network. Kate had moved to stand beside the agents, looking at the phone's screen with the focused intensity of someone reading a foreign language they'd once spoken fluently. The timing. 18 minutes ago. That's when Jackson knocked my medical bag over, when everyone was crowded around watching the contents spill. Webb had his phone out filming, perfect cover for initiating an upload sequence. She turned to face the crowd, her gaze moving from face to face before settling on Lieutenant Miller. But Webb's not smart enough to set this up alone. The encryption software, the data access, the operational security required to maintain this for months without detection. He needed someone on the inside with actual clearance, someone who could pull files without triggering alerts. Miller's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, curled into fists so tight his knuckles went white. That's a serious accusation to make without evidence. Which is why I didn't make it. Kate's smile held no warmth. I just stated facts. Webb needed help. Whether he got it from you or from someone else with Group 1 access, that's what the investigation will determine. Morrison's partner had moved behind Miller, not blocking his exit, but close enough to respond if the officer decided to run. The agent's stance was deceptively casual, weight balanced, hands visible but ready. Lieutenant Miller, we're going to need you to come in for questioning. Voluntary at this point, but I strongly advise cooperation. The alternative gets much more complicated for everyone involved. This is absurd. But Miller's protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. Sweat had begun forming at his hairline despite the bar's air conditioning. He pulled out his phone, and 3 people moved simultaneously, Kate, Morrison, and Daniels, all with the same instinctive response to a potential threat reaching for a device. Miller froze, his hand still in his pocket, suddenly aware of how his simple gesture had been interpreted. I was just going to call my lawyer. After we're done here, Morrison said, his tone allowing no negotiation. For now, the phone stays where it is. The next 15 minutes were organized chaos. Morrison made calls that brought more federal agents, these ones in tactical gear that suggested they were prepared for resistance. Webb was read his rights, cuffed with the efficient professionalism of people who'd done this hundreds of times. His hands shook so badly the agents had to steady his wrists to get the restraints on properly. A wet spot had formed on his shirt collar where sweat soaked through fabric. He didn't resist, just stood with his head down while his entire life restructured itself around the new reality of federal prosecution. Around them, the bar's other patrons were having their own reckoning. Phones came out not to record but to delete. Dozens of people simultaneously scrubbing footage they now understood could complicate their lives in ways they'd never intended. The sound of screens being tapped, videos being erased, filled the space with electronic whispers of self-preservation. Miller maintained his innocence but agreed to accompany the agents for questioning after Morrison pointed out that refusing would necessitate immediate arrest. His military bearing remained intact, shoulders back, spine straight, but his eyes kept darting to Webb, some silent communication passing between them that everyone in the room could interpret. Fear, accusation, the death of whatever understanding had bound them together. Kyle and Jackson had backed into a corner trying to make themselves invisible. The earlier confrontation felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Their mockery and sabotage now revealed as tragic comedy, bullies who'd picked the worst possible target. Jackson's massive frame seemed diminished somehow, as if the revelation of his fundamental misjudgment had physically shrunk him. Kate had returned to her bar stool, repacking her medical bag with the same methodical care she'd shown all evening. Each item was placed with deliberate precision, the muscle memory of someone who'd organized medical supplies in far worse conditions. The challenge coin sat on the bar surface beside her water glass, its worn silver catching the light, throwing tiny reflections across polished wood. Daniels approached slowly, his weathered face carrying an expression somewhere between respect and regret. His boots on the wooden floor sounded like a measured drumbeat, each step calculated. "I should have recognized you sooner," he said quietly. "The breathing pattern, the grip, the way you moved. I got old, let myself miss the signs. You weren't supposed to recognize me." Kate's voice was equally quiet, meant only for him. That was the point. Shadow operators don't retire, we dissolve, become other people, live other lives. The fact that you finally saw through it means either I'm getting sloppy or the situation forced my hand. Both, maybe. Daniels gestured at the room, at the federal agents processing evidence, at the onlookers still filming despite requests to stop. "This will be everywhere by morning. Your cover's compromised." The cover was temporary anyway. Kate closed her medical bag, the zippers sound final, like closing a chapter. "This was always going to be a short-term operation. Find the leak, plug it, move on. I just hoped to do it without quite so much drama." Jackson finally found the courage to approach, his earlier swagger completely absent. He stopped a respectful distance away, his massive hands clasped in front of him like a schoolboy called before the principal. The confidence that had defined him all evening had evaporated, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like shame. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. The beer, the challenge, the things I said, I was way out of line." "You were doing your job," Kate replied, surprising him. Her tone held no anger, just the weary patience of someone who'd seen this pattern repeat too many times. Maybe not professionally, maybe not with the respect you should show anyone walking into a public space, but the suspicion? That was correct instinct poorly executed. You saw someone who didn't fit, questioned whether they belonged. That's good operational awareness. You just let your ego turn it into entertainment instead of proper verification. She stood, slinging her medical bag over one shoulder, the strap settling into a worn groove that suggested years of carrying it. The sight adjustment on the range weapon. That wasn't testing, that was sabotage. There's a difference. One is professional, the other is petty. Learn which is which before you hurt someone who doesn't have the skills to compensate. Kyle stepped forward, his technical mind still processing everything he'd witnessed. His fingers twitched, the unconscious movement of someone used to working with tools and systems. The rifle assembly, 32 seconds. That's not just training, that's thousands of repetitions under stress. Where does someone learn that? Places that don't appear on maps, Kate said, doing things that never make it into after-action reports. The kind of work where being fast means living and being slow means your family gets a folded flag. She looked at him directly, her green eyes holding his until he had to look away. You're good with weapons, good with systems. Use those skills to build things instead of tearing people down. The world has enough destroyers. Morrison approached with a tablet, screen showing a document dense with legal language and official seals. We're going to need a formal statement. Everything from how you identified Webb as a potential suspect, what drew you to this location, the probable cause for your investigation. You'll have it, Kate confirmed, but not here, not now. I need to make some calls first, coordinate with my actual chain of command. She paused, seeming to remember something. The data Webb transmitted. Were you able to stop the deletion protocol? With 40 seconds to spare, Morrison's partner called from across the room, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a close victory. We've got full recovery of the intelligence package plus metadata showing every transmission going back 6 months. This is going to roll up the entire network. Kate's phone vibrated insistently. She pulled it out, reading a message that made her close her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her expression had shifted into something harder, more focused, the transformation visible to anyone watching closely. The investigation just expanded. The data trail leads higher than Group 1. Someone at Naval Special Warfare Command level has been running interference, making sure certain inquiries got buried. Pentagon-level corruption, Daniels breathed. Just like the old days. Just like what got Shadow disbanded in the first place. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, Kate quoted. She typed a rapid response, her thumbs moving with the same efficiency she'd shown assembling the rifle, each keystroke precise and purposeful. New phase begins tomorrow. Bigger targets, higher stakes. More people who thought they were untouchable, about to discover they're not. Want to see the traitor get what's coming? Like this video right now. The consequences are about to get real. Don't forget to subscribe because this story isn't over. It's just beginning. The corruption goes deeper than anyone imagined. Leo had begun the process of reopening the bar, unlocking the door, raising shades that revealed the parking lot beyond where more federal vehicles had arrived. The federal agents were wrapping up their immediate evidence collection, preparing to transport Webb and Miller for formal processing. The crowd that had gathered to watch a civilian get humiliated was slowly dispersing, their phones full of footage that would be dissected and analyzed across social media for days to come, though most would never see the light of day. But Kate noticed something that made her pause. The bar's security camera, which had been recording everything from a corner mount near the ceiling, was blinking red. Not the steady glow of normal operation, but the rapid flash that indicated someone was accessing it remotely, possibly downloading or deleting footage. She moved quickly, crossing to where Leo kept his security system controls. The bartender saw her urgency and immediately unlocked the cabinet, revealing a basic but functional setup. Kate's fingers flew across the keyboard, entering commands that suggested extensive familiarity with security systems architecture, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who'd bypassed far more sophisticated systems in far more hostile environments. "Someone's trying to scrub the footage," she announced. "Remote access, very sophisticated. They're not just deleting, they're replacing original files with edited versions that remove specific timestamps." Her eyes narrowed as she tracked the intrusion attempt, watching code scroll across the screen in patterns that told a story of professional capability. They're targeting the 18-minute window when Webb's transmission went out, trying to eliminate evidence that he was on his phone during that period. Morrison was beside her instantly, his earlier calm replaced by sharp intensity. "Can you stop it?" "Already done." Kate's fingers stopped moving. "I isolated the system, severed external access. The original files are protected now, but this tells us something important. Webb and Miller weren't working alone. Someone's running cleanup operations in real time, watching this situation unfold and trying to minimize damage." She pulled out her phone again, this time switching it to speaker mode as she dialed. The call connected after 2 rings, answered by a voice that carried the distinctive crackle of encrypted satellite communication. "Blackjack. Tower 4 confirms leak is contained," Kate said, her voice falling into the clipped cadence of operational reporting. "Primary suspect in custody, secondary suspect being processed. But we have confirmation of active cleanup attempts. Someone's watching in real time, has access to civilian security systems, sophisticated technical capabilities." "Copy that, Shadow 6. The voice on the other end was older, male, carrying the weight of authority that transcended rank. "Proceed to Phase 2. You're authorized to follow the trail wherever it leads. No restrictions, full support, complete deniability if it goes sideways." "Understood." Kate ended the call and looked at Morrison. "Your investigation just got a lot more interesting. The people running Webb weren't foreign intelligence services. They were domestic, likely current or former military, with ongoing access to classified systems." Morrison's expression suggested this wasn't entirely surprising, the look of someone confirming suspicions rather than learning new information. "How high does this go?" "High enough that attempting to delete security footage from a civilian bar doesn't seem like an excessive risk." Kate's gaze swept the room one more time, cataloging details, filing away information for later analysis. Her eyes moved systematically, reading body language, noting who was nervous and who was merely shocked. High enough that whoever's involved thinks they can make problems disappear. Daniels had been quiet during this exchange, but now he stepped forward with the deliberate movement of someone who'd made a decision. "I'm coming out of retirement, officially. Whatever you need, whoever you're hunting, I've still got contacts and clearances that might be useful." "Master Chief, you earned your peace." Kate's voice softened slightly. "You don't owe anything to this fight." "Maybe not," Daniels agreed, "but I owe plenty to the people who'll die if we don't stop this leak, And I owe something to the young operators who deserve better than having their own system betray them. He held up the challenge coin still in his possession. Shadow 6 hunts the hunters. That mission didn't end just because some politicians got uncomfortable with the implications. Kate took the coin back, her fingers closing around familiar metal. For a moment she just stood there, feeling its weight, the physical manifestation of choices made years ago that continued to shape her present. The worn edges pressed into her palm, a sensation she'd felt countless times before, in briefing rooms and forward operating bases, in moments of decision that would ripple forward through years. Then she looked at Jackson, Kyle, and the handful of other military personnel still present. "What you saw tonight doesn't leave this room," she said. "Not the coin, not the designation, not anything about shadow operations. Webb's arrest will be public, Miller's investigation will be news. But my involvement stays buried. Anyone who posts footage identifying me specifically will find themselves having very uncomfortable conversations with federal agents. Are we clear?" The chorus of agreement was immediate and emphatic. Whatever else could be said about military culture, operational security was something everyone understood. Kate's identity, her real role, the shadow world she operated in, that would remain classified even as the investigation she'd triggered played out in public view. Morrison handed her a card with contact information. "We'll need that formal statement by tomorrow. And if you need anything, resources, access, legal coverage, you call me directly. This investigation has priority tasking from the director's office." Kate pocketed the card and turned to leave, but Leo called out from behind the bar. "First drinks on the house whenever you come back, for life." She paused at the door, looking back at the ironclad one final time. The bar that had witnessed her humiliation, her revelation, the beginning of something that would ripple through the special operations community for months to come. Amber light spilled across worn floorboards, illuminating faces that would remember this night for the rest of their lives. "I'll take you up on that," she said. "When this is finished, when everyone responsible is accounted for." Then she was gone, disappearing into the California night, just another person in civilian clothes heading home after a long shift. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the remaining patrons stood in silence, trying to process everything they'd witnessed. Jackson moved to the window, watching Kate's figure recede into darkness. "We almost broke her," he said quietly. "We had no idea what she was, what she could do, and we almost pushed her into revealing everything in self-defense." "She was never in danger of breaking," Daniels corrected. "People like her, people who've done what she's done, they don't break under pressure. They sharpen. Every insult, every test, every moment we thought we were dominating her, she was reading us, cataloging our weaknesses, deciding if we were part of the problem or just useful idiots." Kyle pulled out his phone, looking at the footage he'd recorded. Hours of video that he now understood could never be posted. His finger hovered over the delete button, hesitating before finally pressing it. What happens to people like her? After operations like this, do they just go back to being nurses, living normal lives? "There's no normal for operators at that level," Daniels said. "There's just the mission. And when one mission ends, there's always another waiting. Someone has to hunt the hunters. Someone has to stand in the dark places and make sure the monsters don't get through. That's who she is. That's who she'll always be." Outside, Kate Rivers walked through the parking lot to her 10-year-old Honda Civic, the same unremarkable vehicle she'd driven to countless hospital shifts over the past 18 months. The asphalt still held the day's heat, radiating warmth that contrasted with the cooling night air. Streetlights cast orange pools of illumination, leaving long shadows between them where Kate moved with unconscious efficiency, her situational awareness never truly off, even in this mundane civilian space. Her phone buzzed with another encrypted message, this one containing a list of names, ranks, and preliminary evidence linking them to the intelligence leak. She leaned against the car door, reading through the intelligence package with the focused intensity of someone whose decisions would determine whether people lived or died. 3 names were highlighted. 2 were unfamiliar, mid-level officers she'd need to research. The third made her jaw clench, muscles tightening as recognition hit. Captain Bradley Hayes, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, 15 years of exemplary service, 2 Bronze Stars, and according to the financial records now attached to his file, recently deposited sums that couldn't be explained by military pay or legitimate investments. The numbers told a story of compromise, of lines crossed that could never be uncrossed. She started the car, letting the engine warm while she reviewed the intelligence package more thoroughly. The corruption didn't end at Webb or Miller. It went deeper, touched more people, represented a network of compromise that threatened the entire special operations ecosystem. Hunting it would take time, resources, and a willingness to become the thing others feared. It would require operating in spaces where regulations became suggestions and oversight became a liability. Her phone displayed one final message, this one from the voice she'd spoken to earlier. Just 4 words, but they carried the weight of authorization and consequence in equal measure. Justice isn't loud, it's patient, and it's already watching. Kate put the car in reverse, backing out of her parking space as the ironclad's lights faded in her rearview mirror. The bar's neon sign reflected off her windshield, fragmenting into abstract patterns before disappearing entirely as she turned onto the main road. Tomorrow she'd be back at the hospital, saving lives in the emergency room, playing the role of dedicated nurse with the same precision she'd shown tonight. But in the margins, in the hours between shifts, in the dark spaces where betrayal festered, Shadow 6 would continue her hunt. Because some wars never ended, they just changed battlefields. And sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who didn't exist, for stakes that would never make headlines, against enemies who wore the same uniform and spoke the same oaths, but had forgotten what those words actually meant. The California night swallowed her car, one more vehicle among thousands, carrying one more person among millions, invisible and unremarkable. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched ahead, empty at this hour, streetlights marking distance in measured intervals. To any observer, she was just another tired healthcare worker heading home after a difficult shift. Exactly as she needed to be. Exactly as Shadow 6 had always operated. In the darkness between streetlights, hunting the hunters who thought they'd never be found. Retry,